So, very shortly, we're going to be creating objects. What you're seeing here is an example of how to do that by writing a file called a manifest. So, a manifest, like making a pod, like you're seeing here, just provides a list of descriptions of these are all the things that I want. So it pretty much is the same concept as you're going to your local coffee shop and you're punching into your app like, make sure that it's oat milk and that, there's this, and this topping and, leave room for I don't know. But point is, that's really all that a manifest is, just writing out this is what I want and this is how I want it put together. Now, the problem is that manifests are written in a YAML. If you don't know how YAML is written or edited, let's talk about that. If you already know about YAML, feel free to skip this section. All right, when you're working with YAML, there are two different types of data that you need to be aware of. The first is definitely the easier. This is referring to lists or sequences. People can call it by different names. So imagine that what you're seeing right there is my grocery list. It's literally a bunch of things that I need to get. It's separated by commas, fine. But in YAML, lists look like this, where every item has one of those dashes in front of it. So it makes it far more visible and readable, and that's really what YAML is all about, making it readable to human eyeballs. The other type of data we need to know about are dictionaries, also called mappings. And these are very different from the way that lists work, in that dictionaries are all about key value pairs. It doesn't matter what order these key value pairs are in, unlike a list, but what you're seeing there in blue are all my keys. What I'm going to put inside of white right here, let's say chocolate flavor. That is the value to the key flavor. Like, what brand of ice cream do I want to have? Hershey's. Or, when I'm buying something in the store, I don't want it to expire any sooner than June 30th, for instance. So notice that there is that colon that separates the key from the value. And you can have key value pairs that are, for instance, booleans. Like here I've got true. And if I'm trying to say calories, about 1,000 calories for a carton seems a small price to pay, you can have all sorts of different values like that. Okay, so now we can see what lists and dictionaries look like inside of YAML. But here's the thing, they compound, they get more difficult, they get nested. A lot of stuff starts happening. Let me show you a few more things. So flavor, brand, expiration, and all this other stuff, these are all describing my ice cream, right? So what I might choose to do is that I would say that ice cream is the key. The value of ice cream is all this stuff. That's what's describing it, right? How am I to say that everything I have highlighted is the value of ice cream? Think by hitting it with an indentation. Indentation is critically important in YAML. It implies ownership. And I'm in Notepad++ here. Notice that there's this little button that I can use to collapse this. Makes it very visible in showing you that, hey, all of this data is the value of this key. And where things start to really get fun is when you have nested values inside of others. So under ice cream, I'm writing out my flavor and brand of ice cream, but maybe I would like to include what toppings I want on top of that ice cream. Here's the thing, maybe I want a list of toppings. Maybe I want sprinkles. Maybe I want some fudge. Maybe I want a cherry and some whipped cream on top. Notice how that list of dashes is indented under toppings. Toppings is just another one of those keys that's indented under ice cream. When you look at manifests, they all follow these rules. And any indentation or dashes that you see are there for a reason. And we'll talk about why that is when we explore some of these other manifests in a little bit. All right, so let's talk about making manifests. Certainly at first, what you're going to want to do is you want to get your manifests straight from the source. Never ever try to write them from scratch. What I got here is the Kubernetes webpage, and you can search for whatever it is that you're trying to make. So let's say pods as our first choice. And when you often go with the very first result, just scroll down and you will find that there are all sorts of different manifests for all different ways that you can use certain resources, as well as explanations of like why and how they work. So the first manifest we're going to look at appropriately is a pod. And the good news about manifests is that even the longer and scarier ones, they all work pretty much exactly the same. And once you learn how one manifest starts to work, a lot of the other ones start making sense as well. What you're going to see inside of all manifests are these three values at the top: API version, kind, and then metadata. Kind, fairly self-explanatory. It tells us what kind of object we're working with. Be careful though, because these are case sensitive. If you put in a lowercase p for pod, oh, that's just going to cause a big problem. So it's little things like that will bite you, and you'll learn very quickly. Metadata is fairly straightforward. Again, notice the indentation that we talked about in YAML. Anything indented under metadata belongs to the metadata section. So later when we're working with things like labels and annotations, those will go under the metadata section as well. Now, API version is kind of interesting. You might recall from when we were talking about the architecture of a cluster earlier that everything in Kubernetes is communicated through APIs. Well, there isn't just the one API inside of a Kubernetes cluster. There are many. And all of these different APIs are configured to configure and work with different types of objects. Version 1, which is like the most primitive API there is, it's been around the longest, is the one that is proficient at creating pods. So it is super important that you get the API version value here correct, or you're going to get some sort of error where it says API version cannot support whatever type of object you're trying to make. And then that brings us down to spec, which of course is short for specification. This is where you get to put in your order, so to speak, of this is how I want my object to be built. Now remember, a pod is just a wrapper around a container or containers. You can put in more than one. Now look under line 6 where the very first part right there is a dash. Remember, dashes indicate elements inside of a list, which means I could actually put in a list of containers. If I wanted more than one, then I would basically just do something like this. This is Nginx2, and this is using something else, XYZ. So that's the significance of that dash there, which will be the significance of anything, including like ports. Like, hey, what ports are open inside of that container? Let's make a list of all those. Now, of all of the fields that we're placing inside of a pod manifest, where you certainly want to be the most careful is right here. Your image. That name needs to be accurate. If there is any sort of typo, like I did just there, you're going to have a bad time because it's not going to find that image. It's going to try to find Nginx, and it's going to cause errors. That happens to everybody, but forewarned is forearmed.